You don't think your way to a new way of acting. You act your way to a new way of thinking. One day at a time, if you're feeling stuck, you just do the right next move. And the right next move has got to be within support of others.
Why don't you be brave enough for one day not to have negative self-talk? Why don't you be brave enough for one day that fucking Keith Ferrazzi's enough?
What I'm trying to get people to do is just be them. And the setup to get somebody to be them is when my heart energy makes other people calm down enough to not be judged, to not feel judged.
Welcome back to the Seano Show. This is great, right?
I love your energy.
I know, man. Come on, brother. I'm your host. Seano McFarland. Today, we're diving into our relationships, leadership, and rethinking the ways we connect in business and life. Our guest, #1 New York Times bestselling author, right? Never Eat Alone, Leading Without Authority. And the new one, we're going to talk about this. This is everyone run to the bookstore, grab this now. Special book. Keith's going to talk about this. I mean, Keith, he's a thought leader. He's about authenticity. He's about waking up. He's about living out loud. He's also one of the kindest, most passionate human beings I know. And I'm blessed to have you. Welcome to the show, man.
I am daunted by thinking, do I have to meet that energy during this conversation?
No, you don't have to, buddy.
Amazing. That's amazing. Coming the whole way down here to Venice from the hills just to see my buddy, I couldn't imagine a better day.
Yeah, and we have a lot of history here.
Yeah, we do.
And I just want to say, I mean, Keith, there's a lot of things about Keith. Always curious, always hungry, always wants to be a better version of himself every day. Every day. And what a blessing. Coaches need coaches. What a blessing that I was able to be in spiritual partnership with you and help you on this path, man.
Absolutely. You are definitely my blessing. And as you know, I have probably funneled a few mortgage payments in your direction from friends of mine.
Yes.
That have also become your mentees and coachees and have been blessed from it as well. You're a real gift to this planet, my friend.
Yeah, right on. Well, trust is a big deal. And we trust each other and we bring it. And I've always appreciated all the love you have for Shell and me. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Let's go back a little bit. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with, let people know a little bit about you, the caddy story, Pennsylvania, how, nothing came easy.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think asking your listeners a simple question, which is, what are they going to learn in the next hour with us? I'd set up a couple of things. First of all, I dug myself out probably several times, which we can talk about, from some pretty desperate situations, economically as a kid, and along the way as a leader and as a person. And I hopefully will really be digging into some of those transformations. And the first one you're alluding to, I grew up in Pittsburgh. My old man was a immigrant Italian family from Milan. They found their way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, out in the boonies, Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And unfortunately, the hope and prosperity that they hoped to find was not there for them. It was a time when the steel industry had crashed. My old man, a ditch digger, steel worker, found himself unemployed most of his life. My mom had to become a cleaning lady. God bless her. She's 91. I was just there this past weekend and
still working out.
She's crushing it. She's absolutely crushing it. Love her so much. And by the way, I love her so much. And a lot of the work that you and I did helped me find that love again.
Yeah.
Which is so important. Look, when I was a little kid, I found out because of my resentment that I was not born into wealth. My old man got me into private small schools just through scholarship and through hook or crook from his good personal hustle. Got me into some really amazing early schools. And I was sitting in those schools literally with the melons and the scapes, etc. And I was just a poor kid. Couldn't afford the clothes and shoes that everybody else had, and feeling very much less than. But it was also a blessing, right? What I resented in not having been born into wealth, I found through relationships. I was a caddy at the Latrobe Country Club where I went and made my $20 a day, busting my ass carrying golf clubs. And I watched these rich people do deals. I watched them get their kids jobs. And I just sat there feeling other and less than. What I realized, though, as I developed a relationship with one particular woman who was an amazing golfer, her name was Mrs. Poland. Mrs. Poland really opened up doors for me. I became her primary caddy. She opened up opportunities for me. She introduced me to people. She got me other clients. She was constantly hustling on my behalf. She ultimately was sort of like a second mom to me.
Wow.
Emotionally.
I didn't know that.
It was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, her son became my best friend. We went on trips together. We were all part of the same church together, etc. But the real lesson there that I woke up to was that people open doors for people that they care about. And that's what nepotism is about. That's why parents, you and I, would do anything for our kids. And we do constantly. Now they're starting to pay back, right? And do stuff for us, which is fantastic.
You've been so kind to Dylan. Thank you, by the way.
Oh my God, what a genius, amazing young man. But, we would do anything for our kids because we love them. Well, if you build a relationship, people will open doors. The relationship has got to be authentic. It's got to be generous. You've got to open doors for other people, and people will open doors for you. And that's the way I've lived my life. In my first book, Never Eat Alone, it shared with the world a pathway that gave me a ton of success when I was young, a ton of success. Youngest partner ever elected at Deloitte at the time, youngest officer in the Fortune 500 at the time, successful young entrepreneur, blah, 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 blah. And what I realized, and I wrote the book about, was it was all about relationship management. And the book was called Never Eat Alone, but it was about building those authentic, caring, generous, mutual relationships.
Keith, let's go back to something that you mentioned, being in Pennsylvania and feeling less than. The hole, the hole in the soul, if you will. So many people on the show are in recovery or not in recovery, are scared and have that piece to them. Talk about that and how you overcame that.
Let me start with talking a little bit about recovery, addictions, etc. First of all, you mentioned it. I've always wanted to be a seeker. I've always felt, now, I think originally it came from the perspective of feeling less than. It came from the perspective of not feeling like I was enough and wanting to hustle to be worthy, right? It was about worthiness, fundamental worthiness. You helped me discover a lot of that on this couch. The early days, being poor in a rich school made me feel other. And as I started to, and I ultimately got into Yale University, but at that point of time, my sexuality started to come to the forefront, and I realized I was a gay man. And that was not in my plans. My dad and my plans was I was going to be governor of Pennsylvania, president of the United States. Back then, it was like an important thing. Just kidding. Yeah. And I had a path set in front of me, and people were ready to stand up for that path. I was being courted by very successful politicians. I was working down in DC, all of those things. I woke up and realized, oh shit, I'm gay.
And how old were you then, Keith?
Well, I think when I first started realizing that I was different was in 5th grade. And then I started to become conscious of my sexuality when I was in 9th grade, in high school. And then throughout high school and throughout college, I would go to church every Sunday, and I would be on my knees praying to God that this curse would be taken away from me. Why would God give this to me? Again, just reinforcing the sense of self-worth. And from a negative perspective, when you're born into a blue collar, predominantly Catholic Italian family, this is not goodness. This is not goodness. And there was no way that I saw back then, that I could be successful, because I saw there were no role models. I mean, back then there was no Will and Grace on TV. There was no Tim Cook from Apple. There was just nothing. Liberace was straight, my man. Do you remember? I mean, literally,
a lot of people were straight back then.
It was crazy.
The 80s, man. Yeah, everybody was straight.
Everybody said they were. But with that in mind, I just dug deeper in the hole. in the whole of self-worth, in the whole of feeling
Shame.
less than, and shame. I remember, you spin ahead, and your work was so important to me. The work of a brotherhood of people committing to support each other and lifting each other up was very formative. The book that I wrote, Who's Got Your Back?
Yeah.
Which you were formative in, because I'll give you the history, the intellectual history. Once I wrote Never Eat Alone about the importance of relationships and networking, change your life, open doors. I started studying relationships that were more meaningful than just networks. They were relationships that wouldn't let each other fail. I studied Weight Watchers. I studied AA. I studied other 12-step programs. I studied YPO forums, small group of business people committing to cross the finish line together, to lift each other up. I didn't have a word for it back then, but what I was really studying was the principle that I now call co-elevation.
Right on.
The principle of having a shared mission, and a part of that mission is lifting each other up to get there. And you introduced me to a group of men that we lived that together in our work. And it was so beautiful. It was a real tribe. And I remember, being introduced to some of your crazy clients who, just unfortunately just lost a big fight recently, and a few others, right? But anyway, so that journey got me into this couch, your conversation with you around shame, around recovery. I think anybody listening, and I hope that this episode bridges a much broader audience for you, because I think most of the executives that I turn on to you, it's not because they come to me and they say, I have an addiction. They come to me and they say they're stuck, and I see that they're stuck. I see that their ways of leading, their ways of working are having them bump up against a glass ceiling that they haven't figured out how to shatter with old behaviors. And if there's anybody that can take a baseball bat to a set of old behaviors and a few heads, it's you.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the principle of recovery, the principle of addiction. Anybody listening to this, whether or not you've got an addiction that shows up in a 12-step program or not, and by the way, I think all of us have addictions that show up in 12-step programs called Al-Anon. That's such an amazing program where every day, if you think that you can actually control the shit around you, then you've got a 12-step program
Amen,
that
brother.
will teach
Right on.
you that you cannot. And it's beautiful. So Al-Anon, I spent a lot of time in. Once you opened those doors to me, remember I was in an emotional relationship with an amazing man at the time who I wanted to control their behavior.
Right.
And I couldn't. And I had gotten my side of the table clean, and I was looking for that person to follow suit. And it wasn't working the way I wanted it to work. And I was bumping my head up against the proverbial wall, and it was the definition of insanity. You showed me a different way of letting go. And I say all of this only because I just want to scratch the surface. That's why I wrote Who's Got Your Back? How to teach a small group of people how to have each other's back. My nickname for it was 12 Steps for the Rest of Us.
All right.
And remember, I always said
yes.
that's a book you should write, by the way. Maybe someday you still will. We all need to practice one day at a time, a ruthless moral inventory, the ability to be generous and give back to others, the looking at yourself, the simple rituals and practices. I think it's amazing. And that book was the germination of the work that ultimately became this new book, Never Lead Alone, because what I'm trying to make business people realize today is that the team could be disproportionately better than it is. Every team, we have 20 years of research, 3,000 teams in our data set. Every team can be elevated significantly from what we generally find is fairly mediocre behavior of political behavior, conflict avoidance, the meeting after the meeting, the walk down the hallway, the talking behind each other's backs, versus a team that won't let each other fail, a team that will lift each other up, a team that will give each other feedback, a group of people whose work is better because of being in relationship with each other, a team that'll cross the finish line together, that nobody wins until the whole team wins. Imagine a roadmap, and that's what the new book's about. It's a roadmap for being that kind of team. And it's not the leader's job, it's the team's job. And I wanted to provide that one day at a time look at what does it mean to be a high-performing team.
Wow.
All started here on this couch.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful, man. Thank you, buddy. What's the biggest challenge you have facing teams when you get in there? Like, walk me through it, okay? Because I know you're working with the best of the world. Complicated people that will line up on you. They're going to try to get you out of the room. Walk me through your process of what you do exactly, because it's really quite something.
So I'll refer to the process, but I'm going to answer your first question, which is, what's the greatest problem with all teams? It's the unwillingness to challenge each other and push each other higher. It's conflict avoidance. It's the absence of a social contract that says, buddy, I am not going to let you fail, and I'm not going to step on eggshells in order to communicate with you. We're going to be clear. We're going to be direct. We're going to be courageous, and we're going to get to it in a very big and beautiful way. Now, that's an outcome of a set of practices that I talk about in the book that increase candor among teams. There's one thing that can exist that makes it a lot better, which is love. You know, you can actually have a business which is all about direct, clear, challenge conversations, data, being right, truth, getting to a better answer. You know, if you look at some of the most successful businesses, Amazon in its early day, even today to a great extent, there's a guy named Ray Dalio who wrote a book called Principles that really talks about this kind of a challenge culture. The early days of Microsoft were not pleasant, but they were rich in their ability to challenge and have healthy conflict. And sometimes in those instances, maybe even unhealthy conflict, but they win because they're trying to get to truth and they're wrestling to get to truth and they're not bullshitting, right? That's the attribute of a high-performing team.
Wow.
You can either do it because you have that constitution and everybody does, or you can build it from love and commitment. You can build it from the perspective of saying we love each other, we're committed to each other, we're not going to let each other fail, we're going to lift each other up, we're going to be joyful, we're going to celebrate, we're going to high five, and we're going to tell each other the truth when we don't want to hear it because we're going to win together. We're going to win together. Now, those are two very different states. Both work. You know, you can get there with love, or you can get there just by a set of practices. But where you won't get there winning is through conflict avoidance and politics and the bullshit that I see in most teams. Most teams are very mediocre. I'm going to say something, you know, let you chime in. It's like, this sounds absolutely heretical. We've over-indexed on leadership and leaders. We've over-focused on leadership and leaders. We have under-indexed on teamship and teams. We need to focus on the teams. I started 20 years ago a roadmap for what does it mean to be high-performing in relationship with each other. And that's, you know, this is 20 years of work. It's why the book is so small. It's, you know, as Ben Franklin said, if I had more time, this letter would have been shorter. I had 20 years to really, really hone my craft of high-performing teams. And I'm really proud of this one.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about this, buddy. I would say things to you early on. I would say, listen, I know you kind of always want to know what the secret sauce is. Do you want me to give it to you? Like the thing, you go, yeah, what? And I say, why don't you be brave enough for one day not to have negative self-talk? Why don't you be brave enough for one day that fucking Keith Ferrazzi's enough?
Look, those words still have meaning to me, right? My shame that was born from poverty and my sense of otherness and shame associated with my sexuality, you know, that stuff is core. It's core. And I have love in my life today after two relationships. I was gonna say unsuccessful, but they were not. I mean,
thank you.
I had two beautiful relationships that I did not open myself to. And, you know, part of it was, so much of it was just, I was not capable and ready for love. And today I am. Today I am in the best relationship I could have ever imagined. I am, and I don't know that I would have ever been ready for it until I did the hard work, that journey, that 20 years or so of waking up. And even before that, for that matter. But those still words, they still hurt. What you just said, one day where you're just going to love on yourself and you're not going to self-doubt and you're not going to have negative self-language. I still need to hear that.
Right.
I mean, it still fucking plays in the back of my head. Those tapes still play. I've started thinking about, and I have a list of the 10 most impactful things that I've done in my life that have opened up new doors and awakening for me. Early on, therapy was definitely one of them, and I would put you into the category of whether it was therapy, coaching, etc. But the ability to have another person look at you and for you to show up and be accountable for moving forward, that is a powerful one of my 10, no question. More recently, about 5 years ago, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but plant medicine opened up an entirely different. Wow. But before that, it was things like, and your audience may or may not know about plant medicine, we can chat about it. But before that, it was meditation. Religion was very important to me as well, particularly in the early days of my journey. But you know what I've found today? That my biggest awakening tool is love. The love that I have for my fiance and the man that I want to be, to not hurt or disappoint, but instead to help that other beautiful soul that I care more about than anything, to have that human elevated. The principle of co-elevation, which I mentioned earlier, I think is a guiding principle for all of our relationships, of every relationship. It should be the basis of your teams. It should be the basis of your business relationships. You and I know that I've had a troubled relationship with a particular individual who's exited the organization in a very disruptive way. And looking back on that I can say this, that human was not a co-elevating soul. And I tolerated that relationship in a way because it was economically advantageous for the both of us, in a way that I'm paying for now emotionally and paid for even in money as well.
Real money.
Real money. But you know what? I look back on that with compassion for myself. I'm starting to look at it with compassion for myself, because that was a really serious learning journey, and it still is right now for me. But I got to tell you, love is my greatest healing tool right now.
We're going to get into love real quick, but I want to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
And celebrate you. I think one of the reasons, Keith, you're so successful with these very tricky, complicated teams, one is you make people feel safe. They trust you. And part of it is you have the gift of active listening. You really care. And you understand other people's pain because you know your own pain. And all those things. Yeah, right?
That is a beautiful
You see it.
phrase, that I can see other people's pain because I know my own pain.
Right.
People have often suggested that my superpower is my vulnerability and my willingness to open other people to vulnerability. I don't think I had made the connection that, having been as shame-ridden and as in pain as I was, it really allows me to be comfortable with it and open up others to be comfortable with it.
Right on.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, right on.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, man. Okay, love. Plant medicine.
Yeah.
Cracked your heart, brother.
Yeah.
How did you go down that road? Walk people through what plant medicine is, what your experience has been with it.
So it was about the time that I was writing Who's Got Your Back. I came here into your universe and met the men's group and the 12-step programs that you were affiliated with. And you opened me up. And I remember going to those Al-Anon meetings and how powerful they were. And, I feel like anything that we do, you always get whatever you get from it And then there's some sloping off because you've got this asymptotic, like push of like, oh my God, this is an entirely new technology. This is an entirely new set of verbiage, et cetera, right? And you go through this massive push. And then you get this leveling off. It's like, whoa. And I remember being in this community, which a lot of the folks in the 12-step community, of course, would stay away from anything that seemed psychedelic or intoxicating.
Sure.
Because there were some significant things that took them down a bad path that had some of those brands associated with them. I got to tell you, the thing that I was called to was this thing called ayahuasca.
Right.
Now, somebody mentioned to me that there's this drink, that if you drink this drink, your mind will become rewired, and the old trauma that has been deep rooted into your brain will begin to be more malleable and flexible, will show up in your journey, and you will view it with less attachment. And therefore, when you get out of your journey, there will be permanence with your having less attachment to this trauma. Whereas in therapy, the idea is that you can experience the trauma in an intellectual perspective, and over repeated therapies, et cetera, and new practices and coaching, you can begin to rewire some of this. But the thought was that this was like the final fucking roto-rooter for me. Like it was this imagining, like, we're going to clean the pipes. It's going to be fresh, and I'm going to be able to I'm going to go back to some of those places that a lot of this shame and hucking and jiving and that came from. So I heard about this, and I heard about a guy who was able to deliver this. And I called him up and I said, hey, listen, I hear that you do this stuff called ayahuasca. And he was in New York, and I was living in LA at the time. He said, just having a brief conversation with you, maybe I was talking for 10 minutes. He's like, I don't want to give it to you. You're not ready. I'm like, what? What the fuck does that mean? It's like, this thing is supposed to be, this amazing cure. He's like, instead, what I want you to do is, I'm actually going to be in LA next week. I'm doing a group journey. I would like you to do psilocybin with me, which is magic mushrooms, and has a lot of the same healing practices and properties that ayahuasca does. And I said, well, I'll make you a deal. I'll come and do this psilocybin thing with you.
No.
But once I get over that, right, I want an appointment for the following Wednesday to do the real stuff. Right. We're going to do ayahuasca. I'll fly to New York, and we're going to do ayahuasca the following week. And he's like, okay, fine, no problem. So I did ayahuasca. I'm sorry, I did psilocybin. And I was in a ball, sweating and shaking for 4 hours.
Wow. Constantly
playing over in my head, why can't I even get this right? Wow. Why can't I even get this right? And I came out of that, and ironically, that night, I got on a red eye after that journey and flew to Atlanta. And the whole time, all I kept thinking was, that's exactly what I needed. Because that experience of trying to hold on to control, fighting it, sweating, self-doubt, shame, that's how I live my life. I've gotten good at masking. By that time, I'd been very successful, had gotten pretty good at masking my insecurities, fears, etc. Unless you talk to my spouses prior, which would say, of course, that I had not been very good. And look, I was not a good husband. And I look back on that moment and I said, oh my God, that's how I'm living my life. I did keep that next appointment on Wednesday, the following week, but I wanted to go back and continue to try the medicine of psilocybin, because I felt like going for what they call the grandmother plant medicine, ayahuasca, I didn't think I was ready.
So it really humbled you. And you knew, like, I'm not right. There's something that changed just in that.
Yeah, it didn't call me. I think what people say is that these medicines, they are spiritual. The ones that I do are from the earth. right? The psilocybin, the ayahuasca, they're indigenous. They've been used for literally thousands of years with indigenous peoples and their medicine. They're an opening to spirituality. I've never been closer to God, and I am a spiritual, religious human. I'm a Christian. I've never been closer to God than when I'm in these practices, and I'm seeing what God made me, and I'm rebirthing the human that was birthed into this planet that God made me pure at the time. And I'm just trying to shake off all the crap that I and others have put on me ever since. So that was powerful. That was powerful. So highly recommend that people read about it. Right now, there's so much research. It's not something you have to take someone's word for it. None of these things are recreational. These are medicines. You should only do them with serious guides that have come with referrals and experience and training. This is not a joke. This is serious hard work, and you need to do the integration before, and after. All of these things are important. But what I can tell you is they are meaningful, and they can and will change your life.
My reflection on watching you in the last 5 years from your journeys, the numerous journeys you've taken over the years, is you're kinder, more balanced, not so worried what other people think about you. And I want to really see what it's like to be with one person and open my heart and be vulnerable with one person. It gave you the gift to I feel like I can actually do this in my life right now. And you called it in. You called in Kel.
Yeah, I did. I called in.
You called it in.
Called in the love of my life. And I used to think that I really didn't ever imagine that I could feel the kind of love that I would watch on movies. I thought it was just totally escaped me. And I just assumed either that nobody really could, or maybe I was just so damaged that I would never be able to feel that. And I was like, okay, then finding good acquaintanceship was sufficient. Right. And then I would subject a yes to a relationship that I knew wasn't the love of my life because I couldn't feel it. I couldn't absorb it. And that's really so unfair to the people I've been with. And by the way, it's not even, I've had 2 long loves and a number of other relationships. But I even now think about, as I go back, on the people who, I would have dating relationships with and realized how unfair I would be, how I was not present. And, I might have been, in my mind, high integrity because everything was on the table and it was like,
disguise as selfishness. Disguise as selfishness. Yeah.
It's nice to be in a different place today.
Yeah, it's really great. It's really, oh my God, buddy. Yeah. Also, your capacity, I just want to, your net for helping people is universal, but it's even more specific now. You help people in such a different way right now.
Well, look, I'm
not just in the workplace, human beings.
Yeah. I still have so much further to go. You say that I'm a seeker. I am, in that I only hope and imagine that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I will be yet at a fundamentally different level in terms of my ability to show up with compassion without the tape in my head, continuing to play. Yeah.
All right, let's talk about this, buddy. You have gotten your ass handed to you on many levels, business-wise, relationship-wise, a lot of different things, a lot of failures, a lot of betrayals, a lot of tricky things helping, your kids out. To the audience, the relapsers, the people that are falling down, the people that are scared, the people that just like, what the fuck? How'd you keep going? How'd you stay in the light? How did you walk us through that path, please, Keith?
So I don't think anybody out there needs to hear what about my DNA made me resilient and got me to always get up and get back to the table. That's not as relevant, to be honest, because I know, and I've never experienced this, I know that there are people out there that just don't want to get out of bed. And, whether that's actually, I'm sure there are plenty, or if it's just more euphemistic in terms of, just wanting, not seeing the path, not seeing the light, not seeing possibility. But I'm going to take it very differently. There's a phrase that you taught me and that I learned hanging around your community. You don't think your way to a new way of acting. You act your way to a new way of thinking. The most important part of that is that when you're stuck, it's trying to get yourself into a fundamentally different mindset is not the point. The point is action. And what I can tell you in all of my research of 20 some years, that the most important actions are the actions of otherness, the actions of collectivism, actions of letting a group of people help you. So everybody out there thinks they have darkness, whatever that happens to be. There are a group of people that if you opened yourself up would be there for you to help you get out of that darkness. And you know, whether that's your team that you work with, whether it's a church group, whether it's finding a men's support group, whether it's, as we talked about before, you know, Al-Anon, but there's a group of people that could help you take those next individual steps to get to the next place. That's why I love coaching. You know, it's coaching is what you do for me, as you are one of those other people that I can turn to when I'm stuck. And you just can't do it yourself.
Right.
You cannot do it yourself. And a willingness to ask for help and open yourself up to others. And sometimes you have to pay those people. Sometimes you can find them for free. But one of the things that's important is that you should find a posse that you don't pay for.
Right.
That is that group for you at all times. And we all need that. You know, my friend Peter Diamandis is that for me.
We had Peter on last week.
Oh, did you really?
Yes.
That's awesome.
We talked about you.
You know, it's so important that we find the posse that we aspire to be like, and at the same time, all aspire to lift each other up. That's why I wrote Who's Got Your Back? You know, I wrote that. And now I've written the book that does it in the workplace. You know, if you want the self-help version, you could probably go and get through Who's Got Your Back, which is a much bigger book. But over 20 years, I've filed it down into this much thinner compendium of shifts we need to make. We talked about the shift from being conflict avoidant to being courageous and candid, right? The shift from being accidental on relationships and building bonds to being very purposeful about that. Funny. The shift from trying to do it all yourself and figure out the answers in your own brilliant head, or the shift to inclusion and listening to diverse opinions and opening yourself up to collaborate with people that gets bigger and bolder ideas than you could ever do yourself. So there's 10 critical shifts in the book. And each of those shifts have a hero story. They have a few simple practices. And the idea is to use the book as a team to, like, one chapter at a time, just start playing, trying new stuff on, you know, and seeing what manifests with the team.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Something else that you are a master of. The best way to get out of self is be of service.
Yeah.
Let's talk about service. There's service in what you're just laid out.
Yeah.
Be there for your fellow employee. Let's talk about it in a global way, though. Let's talk about it for your own way, okay?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
So, look, I think that I had an advantage. My shame was my fuel for service early on. I'll explain what I mean by that. I think early on, I didn't think that anybody would let me in a room, that I didn't deserve to be in the room, whatever that room was. And if I didn't bust my ass and be of service to others, then I wouldn't be invited and I wouldn't be worthy.
Wow.
And it's interesting because that opened up massive doors. If I'm running around looking at somebody that I aspire to be in company with, that I inspire to create things with, that I inspire to show up with, and I look at that person, I'm like, okay, how do I serve that person? I'm going to use a Seanoism. How do I serve that person like a motherfucker? Right? And, you know, it's like the ability to be of radical service.
Yeah, man.
To somebody. It is amazing. All of a sudden, some of those powerful people in the world pause and they're like, whoa, you want to do what for me? You want to help me how? And then once you do that, then I would follow with my natural authenticity, my vulnerability. And I would find that these powerful people who came into listening for a moment, because I thought I told them, I always go up to people and I'm like, in my head, I prepared 5 packets of generosity. Like when I first met Peter, in the back of my head, I was like, okay, how do I help Peter raise money for X Prize? Right? This is a guy who I saw doing brilliant things as a young man. He wasn't the famous Peter Diamandis at the time. Don't even think he had written the book. He was a space geek trying to raise money for this thing called X Prize, but I really bought into this guy. And I was like, wow, how do I help this guy?
Wow.
And then when I show up, but let's go one step further. If I can show up being of service to somebody and they pause for a moment, why don't I then tell them what's really going on in my life? And why don't I invite them to tell me what's going on in their life? Now I apply that same service to another level of depth. Oh, so you're struggling in this way. Well, maybe you can talk to my friend Seano. Well, you're struggling in this way. Well, maybe you can talk to this other friend, or maybe I can introduce you over here. So all of a sudden, I'm now being a life coach
Right.
to somebody that I've had a transactional business relationship with. And now the relationship is loyal, it's deep, it's solidified. Imagine if a team did that for each other. Imagine if a team not only was of service to each other's ideas, but they were in service of each other's energy.
Right on.
Right? And
Yeah.
that's powerful when you start to mix those things together. And what's funny about it is it's not a difficult path. It really isn't. It's just starting with simple practices. So today I get to be of service. I pinch myself. Like, I am called in to help the turnarounds of some of the most prestigious brand companies you'd ever know. I sit in these rooms with icons, and I'm also at the same time helping some of the wealthiest people in this world who have started some of the most successful young companies with their paths is young, high growth teams. And as you know, I've started to work with governments.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, for God's sakes, to be invited in to help transform a government and help a country double its GDP and
Right on,
retain its gross domestic happiness. So anyway, it's like, God, I love it. I mean, I'm on a path. It's not a cruise control, as you know. Like, God, it's not cruise control. My crazy head is still always talking to me.
But what I said when you were saying, like, people, Keith came in here really cocky, like, okay, yeah, who are you? And kind of like how you talk to that shaman. Like, give me on.
Yeah.
And I only loved you more because I understood how much pain you were in.
Yeah. I never send delicate people to you.
No.
The people I send to you are the people who need broken through because they are so resistant. If you look at some of your iconic successful clients, so many of them were not the delicate types.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And you are able to take a baseball bat to glass ceilings.
Spiritual baseball bat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Baseball bat to
But,
glass ceilings.
I also want to say something too, buddy, that you mentioned, and it warms my heart when you pinch yourself every day. I always tell people, we talk about, we never ever want to forget where we came from. And for me with you, it was the kid who couldn't afford the Izod shirts. I never forget. Tell the story about that, because it's really...
I mean, my mom, we were so poor that I'd go to these rich schools and I couldn't afford the clothing that they had. My mom would go to the cheapest Sears or wherever it was to buy regular just shirts. But then she would go to the Salvation Armies, the nearly new shops, and she would buy the children's clothing, the cheapest, rattiest stuff that might have had an Izon on it.
Yeah.
She'd cut it off and she'd sew it back on my shirt.
Yeah.
But it's even worse because then I would show up at the caddy yard as a caddy, and the kids were like, who is this kid trying to not be us? Like, who is this kid trying to be better? They would hold me down and rip those Izons off.
Oh.
And so it's like I was living in these two worlds.
Yeah.
Where I was trying to aspire to be worthy of these rich communities. And I was still, in a world where they didn't appreciate somebody trying to get out and trying to pull that back. And I certainly had no navigation skills. My parents, God bless them, and this is really problematic for Mom and I, but they didn't know how to deal with it. So they gave me all of this access. They made it possible. But then I'd be ashamed of them. Because I wouldn't want Dad to show up in his beat up clothing and his dirty hands and in our car with rust spots all over it. I'd want them to drop me off, outside of the school or not show up to the things. And that really hurt my parents, I could imagine. And they didn't have the skills to be my coach. Like they didn't have the parenting kind of stuff that people write about today. And so then I would get my parents giving me shit, like not just shit, but they'd be like, you're ashamed of us. All we want to do is helpful to you. And fuck, I was caught in all three, caught right in the middle of all three of those things. Fuck. I mean, no wonder it fucked me up.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
What are you thinking right now, buddy?
I just think I want to cry.
Yeah. Why?
Just a little bit of empathy. Yeah.
A
little bit of empathy to why and to that kid,
We got to love him every day. We got to love that little boy every day. I also think that's why you're so good at what you do, because you see the little boys and little girls and other people. Whatever their version of the eyes out and the bullies ripping them off, you get that really well.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's a real honor, man. Because I know when I'm blessed to go to any event that you're doing or going to your house, I go, Seano, boy, you're really blessed, man. Be in this good company.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
You're coming to a big event in a couple of days.
A couple of days.
And again, it's, to me, it's easy I call it relaxing into gravity.
So great.
What I'm trying to get people to do is just be them. And the setup to get somebody to be them is when my heart energy makes other people calm down enough to not be judged, to not feel judged, to not feel, to feel capable of stretching themselves into that vulnerability. And once you get one person showing up that way, and I usually do it for myself, like I will, the exercise. It's like I ask people, like, what's really going on in your life right now that you're struggling with? What a crazy thought that people would actually tell you. And it's totally doable. You give people long to show up as themselves.
Ask a simple question. Right.
Ask a simple question, but then answer it yourself. You got to set it up. If I just asked what's everyone struggling with, you would get an intellectual answer.
Right. Great.
But if I deliver my
Here's
own
what I'm
emotional
struggling
answer,
with. Well, it's a different version of drunk to drunk, trauma to survivor, business person to business person, right? How about the person who's watching this and going, yeah, Ferrazzi, you're the fucking master networker. Like, I'm just as scared to go to the coffee place here and introduce myself to a fellow employee. Walk somebody who, you talk about networking, you talk about getting out of your comfort zone, somebody that doesn't maybe have the skill set. Small steps for people. Keith, can you walk them through it, please?
I will. Those are what I call high return practices. I can give you a few practices. But again, I think I want to go back to my core belief, which is it's about other people. Don't think you can do this yourself. The ability for you to get out of your comfort zone and into a very difficult situation, you need a wingman or a wingwoman. The wingman or the wingwoman in this case is somebody who will, if I went into a bar when I was single, I could schmooze, I could flirt, I could do whatever. But the one person that I looked at that I was like, wow, there's something special there. I was so incapable of walking up and talking to that person. But with a wingman, you got that courage. Sometimes they'd walk over with you. You'd both walk over. Maybe that person would go over and say, hey, see that person over there? That person over there thinks you're cute. You want to talk to them. I mean, like whatever it is, like a wingman, a good wingman is somebody who can turn your life around. And we need that in our lives. And sometimes, as I said, sometimes you have to pay for them. You can buy a coach, a therapist. Sometimes you sign up for it. Like you go to Al-Anon or some group, a men's prayer breakfast.
Right.
Exactly. And sometimes over time you create it for yourself. And, but we need others. That's the bottom line. We need others.
Perfect.
And interesting enough, it's the same thing I do for teams. So here we are, we're sitting on a team at work. And I don't think about them as my lifelines. I don't think about them as my co-elevators. I get my job done. You're getting your job done. We're plugging it in. We're doing this stuff. It's like all of a sudden, if you can flip that to being a different social contract We're going to lift each other up. We're going to not let each other fail, etc. Game changer.
Right on.
So it's the same advice across different dimensions, you know?
Beautiful. I'm going to move gears a little bit. I'd like you to talk about your dear friend who passed recently in Las Vegas. You started a foundation in his name. I think it's an incredible story to tell and what you learned there and what you're doing there, if you don't mind.
Thank you. So when I had written Never Eat Alone, I heard that there was a company in Las Vegas that had my book on a wall in a frame, and that they were giving it away to people who would do tours of the company. And I'm like, wait a second. First of all, tours of the company? What do you mean tours of the company? Yeah, apparently this company was so unique in its culture and the way it did work that people came and took tours to see what they were doing. Wow. And the company was called Zappos Shoes. And what they had done is they had taken an old school call center company, e-commerce, selling shoes online. And this guy who was one of the co-founders, Tony Hsieh, said, I want to prove that if you love on a group of people and you give them permission and encouragement to love on each other, that we could create a level of employee experience that would flow out to customers, and customers would be disproportionately more loyal through this culture. And he did it. It was iconic. And he wrote a book on it called Happiness Delivered. And he unfortunately was struggling with his own demons. And during the pandemic, when we were all locked up and locked away, Tony started a downward spiral emotionally for himself, and which ultimately culminated in his death during the pandemic. And when I heard about it, after I literally got up off the floor, I decided that I was going to start the Tony Hsieh Award. And I don't think anybody could fill Tony's shoes, but maybe thousands of other entrepreneurs and leaders who were looking to elevate humans in the workplace in crazy ass radical ways and redefine work that would not only change work, but would change society, that we're going to find those people. And we're going to bring them together, and they're going to serve each other. This community will share its best practices and elevate each other, but then we'll create onlookers. Next Tuesday, Monday night and Tuesday, I fly to New York for the gathering of the Tony Hsieh Award, where I have 80 of the most prominent heads of HR and CIOs, technology officers of the largest companies, talking about how their partnership is changing the workplace and society, all in Tony's honor and name. So, yeah, no, I think what Tony did for me, he was an investor, he was a friend, he was a confidant. What he did for me and what he did for society is something that I just want to make sure it doesn't dissipate into the mist like Camelot. And, you know, I let me just pause on that. Legacy is a funny thing.
Yeah.
Like, I think many of us, particularly many of us of success, we get twisted in, you know, as Tony Robbins, when I would go to his events, got to know Tony really well, would talk about significance, right? And, you know, what is driving you? And significance is a big driver for a lot of people. What are they thinking of me? What do they think of me? And I think legacy is often is often thought of as a way to continue to live, but I think sometimes it's offered as a way to continue to live, continue to be thought of.
Right? Oh wow, I love that.
And I'm not sure that's the healthiest way to think about legacy versus the way I've tried to think about it, which is, how do I leave the greatest footprint on this planet? God gave me a set of capabilities, how do I be of greatest service with those capabilities?
Mm-hmm.
It causes me to do crazy things like, running around the world trying to serve a country on the other side of the world that takes me, like a day and a half to get there. Yeah, I just want to, and I think some of it probably goes back, as I said earlier, some of it probably goes back to wanting to continue to prove to myself that I'm worthy, that I'm worthy. But in the meantime, I don't think anyone's going to fault me from trying to be of service in a radical way.
Amen, buddy. You never will stop that. It's unacceptable to stop that. Speaking of our beautiful brother, Tony Robbins, it's so funny. I was just thinking about him while you were talking. What's the best thing you've learned from brother Tony?
What I just said a second ago, probably. And that what is the tape that's constantly playing in the back of your head that's driving your actions? And what are those tapes that really need to be shifted? Like, what are they thinking of me?
Mm-hmm.
That's gotta shift.
Mm-hmm.
That's gotta shift.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was for me. He has a wonderful scenario that he goes through in Date with Destiny and a number of other of his courses that, and by the way, I put him on my list of one of the 10 things that have shifted my life.
Wow.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other mentors that have had great impact on you? Who, besides that, the generous woman at the golf course? Other angels in your life?
Prior to, there was a guy who I met when he was an open heart surgeon. And my first husband and I were out to dinner with him one night and his wife, and he got beeped that he had to go and like replace a person's heart that night.
Wow.
And I got to follow and observe that whole thing. It was just amazing. And he and I became very good friends. And one of the things that I've always said is I had so admired his love for his wife and so admired her commitment and partnership with him. The two of them, he ultimately became a very famous doctor. And it was all because of the work that his wife did in the early stage. Helped him realize that he should create a series of books called You, the Owner's Manual. Before any of us was talking about longevity or anything, he was, and then as a result, Oprah figured out that this guy was special and brought him on her show. He ultimately had his own show. His name was Dr. Oz.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I know a lot of people may or may not agree with his politics. But behind the scenes, and look, I don't think it's, if you read my early books, you see a lot of the relationships that I had with people like the Clintons and Obama in the early days, et cetera. So it's probably not surprising to folks that I may not have been a Trump fan. But you know what I did? Kale and I flew down to Florida during the election. And I had dinner with Mehmet and Lisa for the sole purpose of I wanted them to try to convince me that this guy was okay. Like I was again, I think it's just I wanted to be a seeker. Mm-hmm. It's like here are two people that I admire and respect, who I love their love. I care for them as people. And I wanted them to convince me that this guy was okay and he wasn't going to do the things that I had in my head that were going to be done with his presidency. I do feel that politics has become so divisive and so lacking any empathy or desire to listen. Like, I grew up in an era when Reagan and Tip O'Neill would battle it out and then have drinks together.
Have a beer later on. Yeah.
Like I want to understand other people's points of view. Mm-hmm. And I want to anyway, I was just on another podcast and they asked me the question, if you were called by the new chief of staff to coach the cabinet, the new cabinet being formed, would you do so? And what would you do? Ironically, I wrote an article about this for the Biden cabinet. I wrote an article in Fast Company magazine that described what I would do to make the cabinet co-elevate. Because the cabinet is a bunch of individuals working for themselves in their own areas. There is no commitment to cross the finish line together. And they certainly don't have a commitment with the Hill. You take a look at the government and how it works in silos that are divisive and constantly embattled across party lines, when in reality, we should be on one team trying to make the country better and trying to serve the people. And that should be true of companies. That should be true of governments. Yeah. So I would serve any government to try to help them, level up, to co-elevate.
Okay. Routines. I know you very well. You're like me. Talk about your workouts, diet, meditation. What keeps you being able to get on planes, travel around the world? Yeah.
Every day that I can, I work out. So, yesterday I left my mom in Pittsburgh and was moving out here, traveling out here. There was no nonstop flight. You had to go through Chicago. Got here. My boys were at home. I needed to do some decorating. So yesterday, I didn't get a chance to work out. But every other day, I make sure that I work out. Only when it's unfeasible, feasible to do it. That's number one. Number two, I say gratitudes every morning. So every morning I wake up. I always wake up 15 minutes before I need to, put on snooze. And in that 15 minutes, I lie in bed and I focus on the three things that I'm most grateful for that are right there in the moment. And I'm never in my life allowed to repeat two things. So yeah, you have to find three new things you're grateful for that you've never shared before. And not difficult. Not difficult when you get into the attitude of gratitude.
Right on, man.
Is that yours, attitude of gratitude, or is that Tony's?
I think that might be Tony's, and I think Tony stole it from somebody in recovery.
Yeah, I'm sure. Many things have.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I do in three things I'm grateful for, and then three things that in that day I'm looking forward to on that day. So it could be a shitty day that I've got a bunch of stuff I don't want to do, but then I find the three things I'm looking forward to. And I think that's a powerful ritual. I do that every day. I don't meditate. I wish I did. Maybe I call this my meditation.
Yeah.
It's a verbal meditation. It's I certainly from a diet perspective, I try to keep my weight appropriate and I don't eat, too much crap. I have found that as a wrestler most of my life, I know how to feel my weight. So like if I'm 5 pounds overweight, I feel it.
Right.
And I know how to get it back in check. It's amazing how these peptides that are coming along now, like Ozempic, et cetera, it's going to be game changing for the world. I don't know why people are shitting all over the idea that we're going to have some medical support in getting weight loss under control. You look at where I just came back from Pittsburgh and I went shopping at Walmart.
Wow. A lot of big folks there.
There's a lot of big folks there.
A lot of big folks there.
And I can't wait until these individuals find a path to health.
All right. All in with this, buddy. You and I have both worked with billionaires, big artists, a lot of interesting people that are miserable. What's the key to happiness, Keith?
For me, it's one day at a time, loving myself. Right. And that's very
gotta start with
difficult.
Self-love.
Yeah, that's very difficult. I would say it's got to be, I remember going to my first ayahuasca retreat and they were talking about this idea of self-love. And I literally raised my hand with a group of maybe 40 other individuals that were at this retreat, maybe it was 30. And I said, I gotta be honest, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't think I've ever loved myself. And I don't even know how to approach it. I don't know where I would go. And I said, if any of you truly loves yourself, could you come and help me? Like, let me know what the path is for you. And, I think that I think it's a journey I think it's a journey. I don't think that I'm not in love with myself as much as I'm in love with my partner. But I'm in love with myself enough that I can be in love with my partner. And it's all the basic steps, all the simple steps that you talk about. I actually think that if you follow the Dalai Lama's wisdom, the 12 steps are God's greatest gift to humanity
Right on.
in this century. And I feel like all of us should follow the 12 steps as a basic way of living. I've been encouraging you for years to write that book.
Well, this is my 12-step book
I know,
right now.
Yeah. My intention was to make you get out there and help all of us, follow in those beautiful 12 steps of awakening. So,
I love you, man. Thank you for making time today, buddy. This is special.
Thank you.
This is really, really, really special.
You say that to all the girls.
The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarland, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Ferrazzi. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.